A very important discussion about fighting games is happening right now on social media, and it's something I've wanted to share my opinion on for a while, so there's no better time than now. I've been playing fighting games for over 2 decades now, and I've personally experienced some huge changes to the genre. So if you look at this image on screen, you'll notice 4 new fighting games releasing next year, and all 4 of them have one big thing in common: no motion inputs, which has many people on social media worried that motion inputs could disappear from fighting games in the near future. And that idea would have sounded crazy just 5 years ago, but nowadays it actually feels possible, since even classic games like Street Fighter have added simple inputs and auto combos, along with Tekken, which is an even crazier example because that series was loved for its complexity and depth. So put simply, basic controls are taking over, and even Mortal Kombat could be next, because its casual audience is very big and the game overall is super mainstream. But alright, with all that explanation out of the way, how do I feel about motion inputs? Personally, I think motion inputs are a big part of the genre, so choosing to remove them from fighting games completely would feel like a massive loss to me. It would be like removing legacy rules from a popular sport like football, and now suddenly players can use their hands because that's easier, which I think would ruin the game because having to use your feet is an intentional difficulty hurdle. What makes football stand out from other sports is that you can't use your hand on the ball. Now with that said, all sports are different and the same is true for fighting games. So if a new fighting game comes out and doesn't have motion inputs, I think that's more acceptable because it's a brand new game. When a new fighting game comes out, like Invincible Versus, it's like a new sport with its own set of rules, and that's completely fine. Now would I still prefer if the game did have motion inputs? Yes, I honestly would, but also motion inputs are a broad spectrum. I think every fighting game player on screen knows the difference between this input and this input. And yes, both of these inputs are real from actual fighting games. I did not make this one up, it's a real thing. Sometimes motion inputs in fighting games do get way too complicated, and it does start to feel like gatekeeping. In other words, these complicated inputs are meant to keep new players out, because only veteran players have a chance of actually doing them. In the past, some fighting games have taken motion inputs too far, but also many new players misunderstand why the inputs exist in the first place. Motion inputs weren't created to make the game harder or to keep new players out. Instead, motion inputs always serve a very specific purpose. Let's begin with the Hadouken, otherwise known as the fireball input. This is possibly the most famous input in fighting game history. You begin by pressing down, then rotate forward, creating what players call a quarter circle forward, but some players just call it a down forward input. No matter what you call it, motion inputs were created to help the player in 2 big ways. Number 1, you almost never get the special move by mistake when moving and pressing basic attacks, like punches or kicks. If you walk forward and punch, the game's not going to give you fireball by mistake. And if you crouch and punch, the game still won't give you fireball by mistake. If the player wants a fireball, then they must perform the specific motion, which is very helpful for gameplay. If fireball was done by just pressing forward and punch, then yeah, it would be easier to do, but you'd also get it by mistake way more often. Another great example is super inputs, which is often 2 fireball motions followed by an attack button. Beginners will see this input and think, okay, that's too complicated. Why does it have to be so complicated? But in reality, this input being complicated ensures that you never get it by mistake, and that's a big deal, because super attacks usually cost meter or can only be done once a match. You get the idea. Making the motion input more complicated ensures the player doesn't get super by accident and waste all those resources they've saved up. If you spend the entire round saving meter for your super, you don't want to get it by accident. But there's another big reason for the motion input being a bit more complicated. Super attacks are very powerful, way stronger than regular attacks. They do more damage and are often invincible, which means they obliterate any attack in their way, and some even go right past fireballs too. So being able to do them instantly with an attack like this would be complete nonsense. The extra motion input is meant to ensure that players can't just mash super attacks whenever they want to escape any situation. Another great example is Zangief's super. It's an unblockable throw and extremely fast, so it would feel really cheap if Zangief could do it instantly at any moment, which is why developers made it a 720 motion, which is 2 complete circles. This makes it impossible for Zangief to walk up and do it out of nowhere. Instead, he must plan his gameplay around this super input. Now with all that said, sometimes super inputs are ridiculous, and for a brief moment in fighting game history, it really did feel like developers were competing to design the most ridiculous inputs imaginable. I mean, just look at some of these absurd inputs on screen. Not only were they tough to do, but as the player, it was hard to even understand what the game wanted you to do sometimes. Like seriously, look on screen. what is the game trying to tell me with this input? Like mentioned earlier at the very start of this video, I've been playing fighting games for over 2 decades, but believe me when I say that if inputs like this went away forever, you would not hear any complaints from me. Like seriously, look at this attack on screen. It's known as Summon Suffering from Soul Calibur. It's an unblockable throw that does tons of damage and is also quite fast. So when you add all that together, I understand why the developers wanted the input to be a bit complicated. That way you can't just do it instantly out of nowhere. Because again, the move does tons of damage and is unblockable and quite fast, I get it, but this input is just nonsense. Instead, why not make the move a bit weaker and then simplify the motion input a little bit? Wouldn't that make way more sense and make everybody happy? Not just the opponent, but also the player doing the move? Yeah, it definitely would, but sometimes motion inputs are complex just for the sake of it. And I'm not joking, that's a true statement, believe it or not. Sometimes legacy inputs stay difficult just because the developers like it that way. Another great example is Akuma's Raging Demon. It's very counterintuitive and hard to get when you actually want it unless you practice over and over again, but all of that's intentional. For whatever reason, developers and sometimes the players want the move to stay difficult. However, situations like that are very, very rare. It usually doesn't happen. So if anyone ever shows you an attack like this and pretends that all fighting games are like that, just show them my video. And for the record, I personally don't like when attacks are too complicated. However, on the flip side, we've all seen firsthand what happens when super attacks are too easy. Yeah, some fighting games have supers that can be done instantly. In fact, both Tekken and Mortal Kombat are guilty of this. I understand some players might love this because it's easier and some players want that, but to me, super attacks should never be this easy because it causes players to mash them all the time, which is just frustrating as the opponent. If I throw a fireball in Street Fighter 6 and Elena counters it with super, I don't get angry because performing super that fast took skill. But when the exact same thing happens in Mortal Kombat, I'm just like, okay. And that's the downside of making attacks too easy in fighting games, especially strong attacks like supers. Players will just abuse the move over and over again. It reminds me of taking a knee in American football. For anyone not aware, this runs down the clock extremely fast and also denies the opponent any chance of getting the ball back, which means if your team has the point lead, then it's basically game over. And fighting games with easy super attacks feel the same way, because when my opponent in Mortal Kombat gets their X-ray attack, I can't throw any fireballs, and I know that. In fact, I can't do any attacks that are reactable because the opponent's just gonna mash super instantly. All they have to do is press 2 triggers, which pretty much anyone can do on a moment's notice, so a huge chunk of my attacks just go away as an option. Maybe I could have picked a better sports analogy, but hopefully you get the idea. For Mortal Kombat games, I'd honestly prefer if the super input was this instead, because it's still easy, but the player has to at least press the right direction, instead of just mashing both triggers the second I attack them with anything at all. So yeah, that's a brief history on motion inputs in fighting games, along with my opinions on why they're usually good, but sometimes bad, depending on how the developer designs them. Overall, motion inputs are supposed to be balanced around how good the move actually is. Fireballs are an easy motion because the attacks are reactable, while dragon punches are a bit harder since they have invulnerability and also do more damage. Then you have super attacks that are extremely fast and do tons of damage, so their inputs are more complicated. You get the idea. How powerful an attack is balanced by how difficult the motion is. However, all of this goes away in a fighting game without motion inputs. Now super attacks and other powerful moves can be performed instantly, which does make them easier and therefore more appealing to casual players, but it can also lead to more frustration and chaos because now everybody can do every attack instantly. Let me know your thoughts on motion inputs in the comments down below. For me personally, as someone who's played fighting games for decades and loves them quite a lot, I'd be really sad if motion inputs went away for good. Honestly, I even get sad when legacy games like Street Fighter and Tekken add simple inputs, because it feels like removing the stick shift from a car and just making everything automatic. Yeah, it makes the car easier to drive, I guess, but it also removes the skill required, which many drivers found fun. I do think fighting games are supposed to be hard, a little bit. Nothing crazy complicated or anything like that, unless the series is known for it, like King of Fighters. That game adding auto combos was a massive mistake. But alright everyone, that's about my full opinion on this current discussion. So please check out my next video on screen right now. It's really entertaining and you're guaranteed to love it. Come back next time everyone, and as always, stay underdogs.